I still had a grocery bag in my hand as I stood in the center of what was once my living room. My mom spoke it, cold and scathing, as if she had practiced it for weeks, without even looking up from the couch. Sweetheart, whose name is on the deed? Thus, I am unable to view yours. I blinked. I honestly believed I had misheard her. What? My question was hardly audible above a whisper. Like she was doing me a favor, she turned the TV down a little and then did it again. This isn't your house anymore, I said. It was you that desired our presence here. However, the documentation, it is registered in both your father's and my names, not yours. You're being generous because you wish to. Don't make this too dramatic then. My bones are etched with that instant, fixed in time. I just picked up the aroma of the roasting chicken. My keys clattered to the tile after slipping out of my fingers. My father was sitting next to her, very still and without even flinching. In the house I had purchased, I felt like a visitor. I was immediately enamored with the 3-bedroom home in a quiet area with a little walled garden. To pay for the down payment, I had worked weekends, saved for years, and reduced everything. I finally took the leap after I was promoted at the marketing agency. Then, that accident happened to my parents. Mom is unable to climb stairs, and Dad's leg is in a cast. The lease on their rental was up. There was nowhere for them to go. I offered the guest room, of course. Daughters do that, don't they? However, what began as temporary became permanent. My space eventually turned into our space. My choices were overwritten and my routines were disrupted. I observed the transformation of my kitchen, the rearrangement of my furnishings and my power. Deleted. Being the idiot that I was, I took it all in since they were my parents. However, this was more than just an insult. This betrayal occurred. Mom finally looked at me and remarked, "You're overreacting. This is what you usually do. Everything becomes a sob story because of you. You weren't expelled by us. We simply believe that you would be better off staying somewhere else for a bit. Take a break, perhaps. Get your feelings in order." Pause from. My own house? I could feel my body getting smaller. Someone told me to go to my room and cry, as if I was 12 all over again. I turned to face my father in the hopes of seeing a flinch, a movement, or even eye contact. He seemed unconcerned by this, though, as he gazed at the television, as if I were non-existent. Even what she said wasn't the worst part. It was how naturally she said it. Her tone of familiarity. It wasn't the first time she had considered it. She had most likely talked about it with him over coffee for weeks. I didn't even cry that evening. Without a plan, I packed a single suitcase, got my laptop and charger, and drove out. I found myself sitting on a friend's futon in her studio apartment, just staring at my hands. "I don't understand," my pal whispered quietly. "Did you not purchase that home? You told me you utilized your savings and bonus, didn't you?" I gave a nod. Yes, I did. However, I allowed them to co-sign after the documents were complete. It didn't seem to matter to me. I believed that we were related. Then it dawned on me. I believed that we were related. However, perhaps I was merely practical. My mother texted me the following morning. "Remember to forward your correspondence? By Friday, I will have the locks changed." I read it 3 times. It didn't seem genuine. I gazed at the screen until my companion gently asked, "What are you going to do?" and removed the phone from my grasp. I took a while to respond to her. However, something that had been dormant for a while woke up within me. I still didn't know what it was. However, I was aware of one thing. I was silent for years. However, I was no longer able to this time. The house wasn't the beginning, I suppose. It was only the last blow. The reality is, in my own family, I had always been a bit of an outsider. I was the quiet one growing up. The assistant, the good girl, the one who never raised her voice, started arguments, or demanded more than was provided. Then, my younger brother was the best kid. Furthermore, I don't say that with the same level of resentment as before. It is simply a fact. Ben always had a crowd since he was gregarious and noisy. He had personality, according to Mom. Dad felt he had the makings of a leader. Ben used every family meal as a platform to share his jokes, plans, and future ideas. And I did the dishwashing. I believe I had just turned 15 on that particular birthday. I made my own cake. Mom had a late shift at work. Dad didn't remember. Ben practiced for soccer. Not until the following morning did anyone remember. At breakfast, they made fun of it as if it were a trivial matter. Dad had been ruffling my hair and remarked, "We'll do something next weekend." We didn't. Small details like that stayed with me. They were consistent not because they were malevolent. One summer, I assisted Mom in cleaning the garage and discovered a box of my old report cards, which had praise, straight A's, and a letter from my teacher stating that I was the most responsible student she had seen in a long time. They hadn't been opened. They were new to her. However, there was a scrapbook with the title Ben's Wins next to the box, stuffed with ribbons, ticket stubs, and printed pictures of him in uniform, costume, or onstage. I stopped attempting to get attention at one point. I concentrated on getting by. I put in a lot of work, received a scholarship, left home at 17, and never looked back. However, even when I was far away, I maintained giving. During hard times, I sent money home. For my dad's birthday, I got him a new recliner. Ben's education loan was paid off when he was unable to keep up. Additionally, I drove 6 hours back home every weekend to assist with appointments once Mom became ill 2 years ago. All of them. Unmarried. The weekend. I was never asked how I was feeling. Not once. I was being dramatic if I cried. I was being grumpy if I became quiet. There was never a cause to accept my feelings, but there was always an excuse to deny them. And yet, I made an effort. After I was promoted to senior account manager, I purchased the house. I had never done anything significant for myself before. That house had been in my dream. I desired my own space where I wouldn't feel insignificant. A place where I could cook without criticism. Finally, a place where I could breathe. At their previous property, however, Dad slipped on the porch stairs. Mom was unable to care for him by herself. Ben claimed that his startup kept him too busy. I offered, of course. They took up residence. I slept in the smaller guest room instead of my own. It seemed like the correct thing to do at first, but after a few months, things began to change. They started moving things around, including my routines, schedule, and furniture. Mom rearranged the kitchen after telling me it was inefficient. Every night, Dad occupied my TV room and demanded to watch the news at maximum intensity. Confusion greeted me whenever I attempted to retake even a little area, such as the bookshelf in the living room or my garden section. "Why do you think this is so important?" Mom would inquire. "It is merely a shelf. It's only a room. It's only a house." To me, though, it was never just anything. I felt safe there. My very first house. The space I created to feel like myself at last. Still, I said nothing. They needed me, I told myself. That they didn't mean to be contemptuous and that they were elderly and worn out. That making concessions was necessary to be a good daughter. Furthermore, that wasn't forever, was it? Then came the day they recommended that I take a vacation from my job. Mom remarked, "You've been under a lot of stress, sweetie. Perhaps now is a wonderful moment to prioritize family. Your dad is more in need of you." I paused. I wanted to get promoted. I'd been handling hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of client accounts while working late into the night. However, the guilt was a powerful motivator. It did every time. The following morning, I called my supervisor to request a leave of absence. I ought to have known. I ought to have recognized the trend. All of my sacrifices were anticipated. Every present I offered turned into a right. Additionally, everyone saw any limit I attempted to establish as a hassle. It was okay, I told myself, that it was only momentary. I knew in my heart, though, that this had never been about love. Control had always been the issue. I had dedicated my life to obtaining recognition, which ought to have come naturally to me. A place at the table, a feeling of inclusion, and while I sat on my friend's futon that evening, I read that text message from my mom again. Something broke, but not in the manner they had anticipated. It wasn't hopelessness. It wasn't melancholy. It was resolved. I muttered to no one. "I've been invisible for too long. In a house I built, they made me feel insignificant." However, it is no longer the case. Saying no felt like a betrayal the first time. Not to them, but to me. All my life, I had been taught to say yes. Even though I was exhausted, I said, sure. Despite my pain, I said yes. I wanted to scream, please. Not this time, but I said yes. However, that day, something broke. The morning was a Tuesday. During my leave of absence, I was attempting to stay on top of things by sending a few emails while seated at the kitchen table with my laptop open. When Dad entered, he placed a pile of dollars in front of me. Water, electrical, he added, and the gardener. We assumed that you could handle these this month. I blinked. Every month, I have been looking after them. He shrugged as if it were a trivial matter. You also reside here, though. That was the time. Something simply stopped inside of me. I glanced back at him after glancing at the pile. No, I replied. Only one word. At first, he didn't get it. What? No, I said again. This is where you moved in. I live here. I covered the insurance, taxes, and mortgage. For the past year, I have been covering everything. I'm not working right now. You think I should pay more? He looked at me as if I were crazy. You were reared by us, and in order to care for you, I quit my job. Quiet. There was no yelling match. There was no drama. It was the first time I had refused to back down. I thought he would argue, to make me feel guilty. Instead, he simply sneered, muttered something about how unappreciative today's youth are, and turned to go. I said the same thing to Mom when she got home from the pharmacy that evening. I said, I can't do this any longer. I have to return to work. What did she say? Are you truly going to abandon your father in this manner, following everything we've done for you? I didn't answer. I simply got up, got my keys, and took a car to the park. I spent hours watching people laugh with friends, drink coffee, and walk their dogs. People I didn't know how broken I was. And something had changed by the time I got home that night. I no longer felt scared. I started packing up my belongings that weekend. At first, just a few things, clothing, books, and picture frames. I kept it a secret. I didn't announce anything. However, I would stealthily carry another box out to my car every night after my folks had gone to bed. It was trivial, perhaps even immature. However, it was like taking back small parts of who I am. Then it took place. I came upon a manila packet with property documents while organizing a drawer in the hallway that I seldom ever opened. I was perplexed to see a mortgage file here because I had stored all of my original paperwork in my office. I opened it out of curiosity. My heart stopped. There was only one name on the title document. My dad's, not mine. I blinked frantically as I gazed at the article. My address was on it. My home. However, I wasn't the buyer, the owner, or the legal name. The blood in my face started to run out. The original purchase documentation was in every folder, so I hurried to my files and dug through them. My name was there, my loan, my bank records. What was this then? This other deed said otherwise, but why? I began looking for signatures, dates, and stamps. That's when I noticed it. A deed of quitclaim, submitted half a year ago. I signed it. However, I didn't sign it. The signature was different from mine. Though not quite accurate, it was near, tilted in a different way. I had never utilized a flourish at the end. They made it up. My signature was falsified. The weight of it all hit me as I stood there, hands shaking. They did more than simply occupy my home. They took it. I gently moved away from the desk as if it were on fire. I had the feeling that my body wasn't mine. I recalled the day Dad fell down the stairs, when I instructed them to move in, the months I spent paying bills, conducting errands, and being cautious around my own house. And when Mom told me to quit my job so that I could support the family, and they had planned this all along, I refrained from crying. I refrained from screaming. I gathered my papers, packed the rest of my things, and closed the door. However, I gave the my living room, one final glance before I departed. The one I envisioned creating a tranquil existence in, the one I had designed and painted myself in subdued earth tones. It no longer felt like mine. It resembled a scene of theft. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer for the next day, and I wasn't trembling when I entered that office with my actual paperwork in one hand and the fake deed in the other. I was prepared. My quiet had been interpreted as obedience by them. However, I was discovering that silence might sometimes be a weapon. After that day, I never went back to the house again. Not once. Wrapped in a blanket I carried in my trunk, I spent 2 nights sleeping in my car while it was parked close to the shore. I didn't feel afraid. I was no longer even depressed. I was just still, as if the part of me that used to wince whenever my father raised his voice or my mother sighed had finally stopped. The clarity you find when no one is present to block it out is odd. I entered the bank on the morning of the third day. I asked for complete mortgage payment statements for the previous year. I had nothing to conceal. Using my own account, I had completed each one on time. I requested that they notarize a copy of the payment ledger and the original loan agreement. I next took a car to the office of the county recorder. I was immediately impressed by the woman at the counter, who had tortoise-shell glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor. The duplicate of the quitclaim document with the fake signature was the one I gave her. I said evenly, "I don't remember signing this. Additionally, this does not correspond to the original purchase record. Could you please tell me what happened?" She glanced at the file before turning to face me. "She suggested that you talk to someone in the fraud unit." I gave a nod. "I'm here specifically for that reason." I had 3 things at the conclusion of the week. 1. A bank statement attesting to my ownership. 2. A formal report on fraudulent deed transfers that was turned in to the county recorder. 3. A new lawyer one with a paper trail who focused on elder abuse, real estate fraud, and, as he put it dryly, familial betrayal. When I told him everything, he didn't bat an eye. Didn't bat an eye when I brought up my parents. He just steepled his fingers, leaned back, and spoke. "Didn't they assume you wouldn't defend yourself?" I grinned coldly. "They always do." Everything proceeded in silence after that. I updated my internet banking passwords. My credit reports were frozen. All utilities were transferred out of my name and taken off of autopay. I asked for copies of all court records that contained my name, created fresh folders. Everything was digitalized. Twice backed it up. I also kept quiet around my parents. I didn't respond to their messages, didn't answer their phones. Naturally, they noticed. The texts were courteous at first. "Mom, I hope all is well with you, my love. Stop by for dinner." "Mom, remember that next week is the HOA meeting. Dad, we must speak. Right now." Then they became icy. "Mom, try not to be so theatrical. We still consider you our daughter." "Dad, do you believe you're intelligent? You don't know how to accomplish this." I laughed at that one. None of them received a response from me. Rather, I returned to my job. Something different, not my previous employment, which had been filled. A contract job that is done remotely. Although it wasn't glamorous, the pay was good. It was mine, more than anything else. I transferred a portion of each paycheck into a fresh savings account, one they were unaware of. I rented a tiny studio apartment as well, not very fancy. It was a simple, bright room with hardwood floors that groaned underfoot and a little balcony. I sobbed the first night I slept there, in the stillness and surrounded by boxes, not out of melancholy, out of relief. I was no longer living with them. I wasn't being extremely cautious. I wasn't attempting to establish my right to live in a house that I had purchased. At last, I was able to breathe. I wasn't finished, though, not even close, because they were still residing in the house when I had liberated myself. My home, the home I purchased, the house they had taken. And I couldn't ignore that no matter how far away I put us. So I had another meeting with my lawyer. "I'd like to continue," I said. After taking a quick look at the county investigator's statement and the revised documents, he gave me a kind of admiring glance. "You know, when it comes to family, most people give in," he added. I said, "I'm not most people. We brought legal action. It would be difficult. These never are, particularly when family members are involved. However, I had all of the receipts, each transfer, every document. They also had a lot of entitlement and a fake signature. There were still weeks till the court date, but the energy had changed even before then. They began making increasingly frequent calls, sometimes begging. Occasionally, I get upset. My mother even visited my workplace once. Through tight teeth, she shouted, "I don't know what story you've made up in your head, but we are your parents." I gave her a direct look. "And when you stole from me, I was your daughter." She took a step back and blinked. "This is something you will regret." I grinned. "No. Yes, you are." After that, I turned back and left. She made 6 calls that evening. I didn't respond. Rather, I stood on my tiny balcony, taking in the cool night air, gazing up at the stars, and allowing myself to experience something I hadn't felt in a long time: command. I was no longer the submissive daughter. I wasn't the little girl who was pleading to be seen. Now I was something else. Something they didn't anticipate. The courtroom did not meet my expectations. It wasn't as opulent or dramatic as in the films. There were only benches and rows, a simple wooden judge's bench, and a persistent disinfectant odor. Nevertheless, my heart pounded as if I were entering a battleground. I wasn't dressed in black. Rather, I donned the deep, burgundy pantsuit that I had stored in the back of my wardrobe for years, the one that I had never felt worthy of wearing. However, today, I was significant today. I entered today as a homeowner protecting her property, not as a daughter pleading for recognition. When I walked in, my folks were already there. They avoided eye contact with me, as if she still thought she could talk her way out of this. My mother sat rigidly, looking through a packet of papers while wearing her typical pastel blazer and pearls. My dad appeared older than I had recalled, weary, smaller, but I didn't feel sorry for him because of that. Both of them had made their decisions. The repercussions, which included wearing heels and carrying a binder thicker than their denials, had finally materialized. Opening remarks were made by our lawyers. Their attorney attempted to characterize the incident as a family miscommunication, that I regretted my generosity after orally offering my parents the house. I didn't wince. My lawyer didn't raise his voice as he stood up. He didn't have to. He presented the facts. My name appears on the purchasing record, the history of my personal accounts payments. The mortgage agreement was notarized. The fictitious quitclaim deed, purportedly signed by me while I was traveling abroad for work, had somehow materialized months after I moved in, including a signature that was very different from mine. The voicemail my mother left me last week was then played. I have it saved. You cannot simply dismiss us. From the beginning, this was your idea. We could have the house, you said. After everything we've done for you, you owe us. There was silence in the courtroom. The judge even hesitated. My mother's jaw was tight as she stared down at the table as I turned to look at her. My father moved uneasily next to her, acting perplexed, as though he were equally a victim of this. However, I was aware he had also signed that fraudulent document. I spoke calmly when it was my turn to speak. In order to purchase that house, I told the court that I had saved for almost 10 years, worked extra jobs, and lived frugally. I explained that when my parents informed me that their rental was being sold following the purchase, I invited them inside. I wanted to assist. I had faith in them. And they had changed the locks when I got back from a work trip, I continued, maintaining eye contact with the judge. From the back row, there was a noticeable gasp. The house wasn't mine, they claimed, that they always owned it. I had the receipts, but they said I was just letting it get to my head. The owner is me. My voice remained steady. I ensured that. The judge paid attention. Examine the documents. The decision was then progressively conveyed. In the plaintiff's favor, he remarked. The rest I hardly heard. My knees nearly gave out. From release, not weakness. Years of silent suffering, quiet perseverance, and swallowed pride all vanished in that one instant. My folks lost. It was a void deed. I was legally given back the house. They had 30 days to leave the area. No appeals, no haggling. It was over in an instant. Nearly. My mother trailed me into the corridor outside the courthouse. Something between incredulity and rage burned in her eyes. She screamed, "It's unbelievable that you did this to us. You'll feel bad about making your own family seem bad." Calmly, the first turned to her. "You embarrassed yourselves. I've stopped filling in for you." She recoiled as if I had given her a slap. My father's mouth opened and closed as he loomed behind her. As though the words were still powerful, he whispered, "We're your parents." I inhaled and grinned, the kind of smile that harbors resentment that has been suppressed for decades. "And when you locked me out of my own home, I was your daughter." I didn't hold out for a response. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed them anything as I left, my heels resonating on the shiny floor, my spine straight, my pulse racing steadily. No justification, not pardoning, not even a farewell. I went back to the residence later that night, my home. The front porch was bathed in golden light as the sun started to set. They were still there. I wasn't shocked. I knew they would make the most of their 30 days. I didn't care, though. because I had the key this time. I belonged there this time. And before long, I would enter that front door once more as the legitimate owner, not as a guest or a young child in need of affection, of my house, of my voice, of my existence. I was surprised by how loud the quiet was. I watched from the edge of the driveway on the day my parents formally moved out as their belongings were loaded into a borrowed van. No yelling was heard, no last insults, only the metallic clang of something being pushed too firmly into a box and the rustle of cardboard. Really, it was anticlimactic. They didn't bid farewell. I didn't either. A weird silence descended upon the home as the van drew away. It was a holy silence, akin to the silence found in the corridors of a long abandoned cathedral. I retreated inside, allowing the door to shut behind me. Suddenly, I was on my own once more. However, I wasn't lonely for the first time in years. I took my time going through each room. The kitchen used to be a place of silent dinners and unsaid tension. The living room, where they used to sit on the couch like kings and queens, watching me every step of the way. They had, without my consent, converted my own bedroom into a guest room. Even if there were still remnants of the past echoing off every wall, I could immediately sense the change. The way the weight of the air was gone. The space inside of me that had been filled with hurt and contempt was once again mine, as was the house. My aunt, who is my father's sister, called me later that week. She had heard about the court case, but we hadn't spoken in a while. I just wanted to say, "I'm proud of you," she said softly. It required courage. To be honest, they were expecting it. I refrained from crying, but I wasn't prepared for my throat to get that constricted. It was odd to hear someone, anyone, express their pride in me without any caveats or any restrictions, without anticipating anything in return. I gave her my gratitude. Following our phone conversation, I took a seat in my recently regained kitchen and gave myself a rare minute of silence. Not a sound, no plans, don't be angry, just give it some space. I didn't sleep on the couch like I usually did that night. I peeled back the blankets and entered the master bedroom, which I had given up when my parents moved in. I also went to sleep, profoundly, calmly. In months, for the first time, the fallout started over the following few days. I'm not taking sides, but my sister, who had been unusually silent during the entire situation, sent me a passive-aggressive text message that started. I didn't read the rest before deleting it. My mother was devastated and felt deceived, according to a communication from a common family friend. She wrote that she doesn't understand how you could be so unfaithful to her. I didn't respond, because I had spent years trying to explain myself to people who didn't pay much attention. I had decided to stop doing it, let them speak, allow them to distort the facts in order to harm themselves. I was done giving them authority they didn't deserve. I turned within instead. I resumed my journaling, which I had not done since college. I had a cup of tea every morning and sat by the window, writing whatever came to me. It was messy at times. It was angry at times. There were times when it was merely a list of my blessings. Parts of myself that I didn't understand had been shredded, were gradually put back together by that simple habit of seeing myself on paper. I got back in touch with old friends. I was asked by one of them, Lily, to a weekend retreat up north. It was simple, consisting of a cabin, books, delicious food, and the kind of laughter that makes your ribs hurt. At first, I was hesitant. However, I went, and it made me remember who I was before everything got so overwhelming. "You look lighter," Lily commented to me one evening while we were sitting by the fire, and I became aware that I also felt it. Not that it had all healed in a day, but because I had at last let go of things that had never been mine in the first place. I gave up attempting to establish my worth, ceased expressing regret for being overly theatrical, overly sensitive, or overly emotional phrases my mother had been using as weapons for years. I started living for myself once more. The house also began to change. The living room was painted by me, changed the curtains, gave away the furniture that my parents had demanded. It was therapeutic, but it took time. I reclaimed a part of myself with each alteration. I had no idea what lay ahead. I had doubts about my family's ability to change. However, I didn't feel the need for them anymore. The true change was that the court decision and the keys in my possession weren't the only things that gave me freedom. It was the silent belief that, despite their disapproval, lack of love, and consent, I was sufficient. I had been waiting so long for them to say, "We're proud of you at last." Now, though, I spoke that to myself in a whisper now, and coming from them mattered more than it ever had. After the storm has passed, there comes a time when nothing moves. Not bear, simply remain motionless. Don't yell, don't defend, no rushing to make things right. Simply space, undisturbed, trouble-free space. Before I lived alone in the house that formerly held the sounds of those who called it home, I had no idea that I was capable of such calm. And I had no idea it would feel so wonderful. Not in a victorious, I won kind of manner, but in a quiet sense, I feel like I'm at last safe. I began rising before my alarm clock, not because I was anxious, but rather because I wanted to be at peace. The kind of calm that results from realizing that you don't have to shrink in order to be accepted. I took my time making my coffee. I brushed my hair while listening to mellow jazz. I let the sunlight in by leaving the drapes open. I had no one to make fun of for being too theatrical or sensitive. Nobody was there to shame me into being more, giving more, or achieving more. Only me. And it was sufficient. I made the decision to go for a stroll around the neighborhood one Saturday morning. I hadn't done that in a long time without having my phone hooked to my hand or my head racing in survival mode. I nodded to neighbors I had seldom talked to before as I went by residences I knew. Others returned the wave. One even paused to inquire about my well-being. I answered, "Much better, and it wasn't a show for once." I visited a little neighborhood bookshop downtown later that day. I just wandered. I hadn't done anything like that in years. Perused. Time was lost. I discovered a copy of Brené Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection in a dusty corner of the shop. Although I had heard of it, I had never read it. I bought it on a whim, and I was just blown away by the book. It made me realize that I wasn't weak for having strong emotions. Rather, vulnerability was a form of silent bravery rather than a weakness. I read every page as if it were a love letter to the long suppressed side of me. That evening, I lit a lamp and prepared a real dinner for myself, not just boxed cereal, not for romantic purposes, not for anybody else, only for me, because I was gradually realizing that I was deserving of attention, even from myself, particularly from me. I saw my sister at the grocery store a little later. She was astonished to see me almost uneasy. She asked how I was doing and struck up a conversation. I gave a courteous response without lingering. "Mom misses you," she added as I turned to go. I stopped. Not out of desire, but after some thought. I said, "I hope she finds peace." "I've done so already." I then turned to go. That's when I realized, really realized, that I no longer needed anything from them. Not affection, it's not an apology. A seat at their table is off limits, since I had constructed my own. Life didn't turn into a fantastical fairy tale in the months that followed. I still had difficult days, lonely people. There were days when I doubted everything, but I was no longer characterized by those days. I began helping out at the women's shelter in the area. I felt more whole for some reason when I helped people recover from suffering. I came across people who reminded me that sometimes being resilient is as simple as getting out of bed. It can be difficult to relate your story while your voice is trembling. And sometimes it's letting go of the people you love in order to love yourself at last. Lucky, a tenacious, one-eyed mutt who wagged his tail as if he had no concept of misery, was the rescue dog I eventually adopted. Every night, he snuggled up at my feet and followed me about the house as if he had always been there. In a sense, I believe we both needed to be located. I still occasionally think about my parents, but not in a hostile way. I regard them as flawed individuals who made their own decisions. Additionally, I regard myself as someone who disrupted the cycle. Since I regained the house, I haven't won. Because I forced them to deal with the repercussions, I lost. I won because I no longer required their approval to feel joyful. Peace was preferable to proving myself, and the best retaliation was that. I want you to know this if you've ever felt alienated by your own family and have been referred to as theatrical, overbearing, needy, or a burden. You're not damaged. You were never too much. Simply put, they had no idea how to hold someone like you. However, that does not negate your right to be detained. By companions. By a family of choice. Alone. Waiting for them to change is not necessary. You don't need to win their affection. All you need to do is provide yourself the authorization they never did, the right to be seen, for safety's sake, to have freedom. And simply know that it's possible if you haven't arrived yet. Since I am a living example,